afternoon. Welcome to our lunchtime study that we call LunchBox. We're now here on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We're very glad to see you. Happy that you can be a part of what we're doing here at First Lutheran. Now, hopefully, as we dig into today's topic that has to do with how our faith affects us in the middle of a pandemic, that I won't accidentally get a song stuck in your head. I got to tell you, every time I read this text, that's exactly what happens to me. We're in the third chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes, but I want to pause for a moment and talk about how the Old Testament is laid out. Sometimes when we are reading the Bible, it seems like it's just endless books that may or may not be connected to each other. If you're anything like me, when you first start reading some of the Old Testament, it just seems like histories that have no connection. You're like, how do these histories work together? Sometimes things jump in that are absolutely confusing. So the easiest way to understand the Old Testament is to understand that it's broken down into sections. The very first section is called the Torah, and it is the 5 books that Moses wrote. And this is the story of humanity from the fall and the creation, all the way through the establishment of Israel in the Promised Land and everything that happens in between. There are also in here books of histories that deal with the prophets and kings and judges that all were the leadership of Israel. Then there are books that we call wisdom literature. The book of Proverbs is wisdom literature, because it really is just that, a collection of Proverbs. The book of Psalms is wisdom literature. The book that we're looking at today, the book of Ecclesiastes, it's just a gathering together of wisdom and important things that the authors wanted us to know. And then, of course, beyond that, we have the major and the minor prophets. And please don't get the impression that the major prophets are the really good ones, and the minor prophets are the also-rans. We call the major prophets major because the major prophets are longer. The minor prophets are minor because their books are shorter. That's all there is to it. But we're in one of the wisdom literatures. And when the authors of the Old Testament were writing wisdom literatures, their goal was to educate people on a simple understanding of some element that had to do with life. How do you get through life? How do you apply your faith to living life? Here in the book of Ecclesiastes, we've got the writing of King Solomon. Solomon is leaving for his people an abiding understanding of the meaning of life. Now, Solomon has been blessed with incredible wealth, incredible power, thousands and thousands of wives, and every physical trapping of human success. And he is dissatisfied with it all. And he says, nowhere in all of this is true happiness. And the book of Ecclesiastes looks at what makes for true happiness. So he writes in the 3rd chapter, and again, if I stick a song in your head, I'm sorry. There's a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time for love and a time for hate. A time for war and a time for peace. Here ends the reading. As I read this, and he says there's a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. I'm like, there's a time to be more than 6 foot away from a person and a time to be close up. We're in the time where you should be 6 foot or more away from a person. One of the themes of Ecclesiastes is that this thing that we call life isn't quite as novel as we think it is. In fact, Ecclesiastes says there's absolutely nothing new under the sun. Everything you're doing, someone else has done. Every problem you're having, somebody else has had. Every tragedy you're facing, somebody somewhere along the way has already faced that tragedy. There's a time for everything, and it's all going to happen in its own time. A friend of mine, who's a bishop in the ELCA, a fellow by the name of Matthew Regal, wrote this. He says, every age tends to think of itself not only as the center of universe, but the center of time itself. Even we mainline Protestants who are so quick to mock our millennialist brothers and sisters, those are the people that believe it's the end of the world and Revelations and all that stuff. We're not immune from, how shall I put it, chronic hubris. We embrace the twin notions that our time is a time unlike any other time, and we humans in this time, unlike all other times, are humans unlike all other humans. That's what we call hubris, which is a really fancy word for very dangerous pridefulness. Somebody said to me, has anything like this ever happened before in the history of the world? And I found myself scratching my head and thinking, well, of course. This is what the world looked like before vaccines. This sort of thing happened over and over and over and over and over again. In 1918, the world faced the Spanish influenza, which was a lot more deadly than the one we're facing right now, and it killed a lot more people. Ironically enough, we took pretty much the same countermeasures then that we're taking now. Well, they didn't call it social distancing back then, but it was the same thing. And as human beings, we feel like the time that we're living in is somehow a time unlike any other time humanity has ever faced before. But you know what? We have faced it before, and we've come through it, and we've survived. And it's just like the author of Ecclesiastes is trying to tell us there's nothing new under the sun. Humans have done this before, we'll do it again. The fact that we have lived in a world without major outbreaks of horrible diseases is a product of vaccination and medical care. The fact that this new, and they call it a novel virus because it's new, we've never seen it before, our bodies have new immunities and science has no tricks up their sleeve to get rid of it quite yet. They're working on it. The fact that we're seeing a new virus is simply a taste of what the world was like once upon a time. And you know what? God brought humanity through each one of those times before, and he's going to bring us through it today. And when I say there's nothing special about the time that we're living in, I don't mean that it's not an extreme moment in history. As we all know, the 1918 Spanish influenza has been a matter of history that have been written about in books and history texts. It was a big deal. But it's not new. This is not new. We've come through this before. We're going to come through this now. And you know what? At some point, maybe in the year 2118, we'll come through it again. This is what we humans do. With God's help, we face the time. A time to refrain from embracing. A time to mourn. A time to stay home, stay safe, be wise. But what the author of Ecclesiastes wants us to remember most of all, it's always a time to trust God. So I hope that is what I leave you with today, with the notion of how does our faith help us find a time of pandemic? Know that what we're going through is not new. Know that what we're going through we have survived before, and know that God is walking with us through it, and we must trust. Tuesday was be still, today is trust. So I say to you all, thank you for being with me this Thursday. Of course, yesterday was our last Lenten study. Wow, that's hard to believe. This Sunday is Palm Sunday. Obviously, we won't be up in the sanctuary worshiping. We will be online on Facebook and YouTube. You can find the links right here on the screen below me. Of course, we also will be doing our communion in the parking lot, and we will have palm leaves for you. Holy Week is next week, and we may have to get really creative with that, but you know what? We'll have fun with it then, too. Please stick around for the rest of our announcements. God bless, and see you later. Go in peace, love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.